During this webinar, there will be images of accessible travel and travel in general. These images serve to accompany you to the vision of the webinar. There is no particular meaning behind these images. We are sorry, but there won't be an audio description where they are shown.
Welcome everybody. Welcome to this webinar, how to set up a trip in a leisure way for visually impaired people. Well, this webinar is created under the program Erasmus Plus, K-Action 2 Strategic Partnership, and the project is called Path to Inclusion. Path to Inclusion is a project who want to give to youth worker the skill, the capacity, the chance to start to work with mixed ability group. With mixed ability group, we mean a group of youngsters, basically, with different ability between each other, with different disability, we prefer to call it ability. And the project Path to Inclusion create a website, a platform that is inclusionplatform.eu. And in this platform, you can find several tools to help youth leader to work with mixed ability group. We invite you to visit this website, and you will find basically three main sectors. That is the webinar section, where we are now, and you will find several other interesting webinars handled by our colleagues. The toolkit, that is a theoretical book full of information how to handle with a mixed ability group, with some methodology of work, of course, in a non-formal education. And the map we will speak a bit more in detail after. The map is a section where you can find activities that could be touristical in Europe, among Europe, or at least among the country who are partnered in this project, at least now in 2023. But we hope that we can increase, of course, the contents in this platform. So in the map section of the platform, you will find activities that are interesting and pedagogic. So that's why now we are speaking about travel, because we think and we believe that the trip, traveling, is a pedagogical instrument, because traveling, you go out of your comfort zone, you have to face new experience, you met new people, of course, you discover about the world, and you do many things. Plus, we would like to add the importance of experiential tourism. That's why in the map you will find experience activities. Let's take an example that you are a youth worker with your youngsters. Now the school say to you there is also a person with visual impairment. What we can do? Basically, you come in our page and you will find several activities, hopefully close to you, that you can use, for example, as an excursion with your group, where there is the visual impaired youngsters, for example, and you bring all the group over there. Why? Because there is something planned, structured, well thought for this target that you have in your group, that there is in your group. That's why the experience as an instrument, okay, as an instrument, pedagogical instrument for help a better inclusion among the youngsters, basically. So let's introduce myself. If you're still here and you are interested, I am Lorenzo Tassoni from Italy. I am one of the founders of an organization called Esplora, based in central of Italy. And with Esplora, we work a lot with Erasmus Plus non-formal education, with some local activities in the school. And step by step, we grow since the beginning, we start with experiential and responsible tourism. And step by step, we get into accessible tourism, especially for sensorial disability. Why? Because we understood soon that thanks to the power of accessible tourism, we can give a strong opportunity to our traveler to understand better the place where we are living, where we are visiting. So basically, Viaggi Diffusi choose to offer the chance to the traveler to have the companion from the organization. Why and what does it mean? It's meaning that a person from the organization will be with you, accompanying you. That's permit the person to travel, let's say, alone, because I'm not your relative, I'm not your parent, I'm not your friend. You, as a traveler with visual impairment in this case, you are a bit more free to do whatever you want. Of course, if a friend of you is traveling with you or your relative, you're not completely free to do whatever you like, because somehow you are not traveling alone. You are traveling with this person. So if this person like to go to buy some shoes, of course you have to go with him, because it's like when you travel with friends, no? It's a balance between. So you have to, you come with me to visit a bookshop, I come with you to visit a shoes shop, for example. So in this way, Viaggi Diffusi want to offer you the way, the possibility to travel as much close to the meaning of traveling alone, in a group, but alone. In a small group, basically, we never make trip of more than 6 traveler and 3 companions, so it's meaning 9 person walking. So the role of the companion, it will be the main topic of this webinar. We will see later better why. But for sure, the booking of trip for visually impaired somehow is quite easy. From one end, the logistical aspect to take in consideration are not many. The program can be much more flexible compared to a program organized and set up for wheelchair users. Because, of course, you don't have a barrier, architectonic barriers. So, of course, you make a program, but you are not so strict to follow it, to follow that program. We can absolutely give suggestions and tips. One of these strongly recommendation is do not organize trip with too many cities visiting. Changing hotel every day, let's say, is very tough and tiring for visually impaired people, because they need some time to get oriented in the room and the hotel as well. Many people have a pleasure to, let's say, to come to the dinner room, to the breakfast room alone, and maybe thanks to the help of the worker of the hotel, have a breakfast alone. But if you change hotel every day, they don't have time to get oriented in the space. That's why is recommended to stay in, choose few, depend where are you and what's your plan of trip, but let's say few hotel and make more excursion. From the same place, go in more places. In that way, at least the traveler start to feel the room of the hotel as at home. So the companion is that person who bring you in this process, that is also get oriented in the place, get oriented in the room. So the companion start to be somehow enter already in the privacy of the traveler, because at least I have to enter in the room to show you the room, to help you in get oriented in your room. The companion is much more, is really, is not only the eyes of the traveler, can become a friend of the traveler, but play several roles. Usually, the companion stay with the traveler since breakfast until after dinner, more or less. So is a intense, let's say, relationship. Matt is the person who tell you or tell to the travel what is going around you during your walk. Is the person who, for example, in the market, have to describe what there is, which kind of colors, how big is the place, who behave the locals, is the person who during your walk tell to the travel everything, let's say, that attract his attention. So, of course, the companion give somehow a key of how to see the city, because the companion cannot make a description without, let's say, judgment. So the emotion, the impression that the traveler bring back home often are made together with their companion, because their companion obviously give an interpretation of what it shows. Okay, close to this, again, the companion became somehow a cultural mediator, a person who try to transmit the place where we are living. Just give you an example. Me personally, when we are in Naples, we have a very particular and beautiful tour in Naples, and when we walk, I'm speaking, and often I'm interrupt myself saying, there are 4 persons without helmet driving in a motorbike. There is a complete family with shopping bags in the motorbike. There is a person who is bringing in the back a door in the motorbike. Or in Berlin, I saw several bicycles for bringing the babies, but structured bicycle, beautiful bicycle, well done, not just, the seat in the back of the regular bike. And why I underline those aspects? Because are characteristic of a place. For example, in Europe in general, it's forbidden to be 4 persons without helmet in a motorbike. No, 4 persons is already forbidden. Without helmet is also forbidden. But in Naples, sometimes can happen to find them. So I underline, not because I want to say Napolitan criminal, whatever. It's not my purpose, but the purpose is that something that is particular, is weird. I mean, is not common to see. So I have to transmit. But how I transmit this fact of 4 persons without helmet in the motorbike make the difference, because I can have a tone that is absolutely disappointed, and I can use a judgment of it because it's a completely illegal stuff and not safe. So this just to say that you should try to be to not take part, to be impartial, but it's impossible to do that. So somehow their companion is the person who will help the visually impaired traveler to get an impression, positive or negative, of that place. Of course, the traveler visually impaired makes their own impression of the city, but according to my experience, if I structure the program in a certain way, if I describe what I saw in a certain way, I influence the traveler. So I would like, for example, to let you reflect with one sentence, one question, that people often make to me that sounds a bit provocatory or racist maybe, and could be, but many people does it with honestly, okay, not as a provocation. That basically is why visually impaired travel, what they are looking for. If they cannot see, why they go to visit San Marco, no, in Venice, because when you enter in San Marco, you say, how so beautiful this, no, this city and this square and his church and so on. So basically, I just answer turning the question to the person who made it, because all of us, let's say, visual people who can see, when they travel, basically you don't say, sorry, I just saw San Marco Square. Basically, you bring back at home and you tell to your friend the emotion that San Marco Square gives to you. You say, I saw Colosseum, I get so impressed because wow. That's, I just underline why, because is what we've tried to transmit with Viaggi Diffusi, but also is what I would like you, let's say, as a youth worker who are follow this webinar to understand better how to organize a trip for visually impaired. That is important and super important, the role of this person who is their companion, that is working, let's say, beside of the guided moment, the institutional visit, let's call it like this. So that aspect that are visiting in a cultural, more high level of culture, no, the art, the architecture, the monument, should be great if in your trip there is a person who is in charge to speak about that things, and their companion is more a friend of the traveler. Just a short parenthesis, this webinar, we would like to give you input to start this work. My voice, my word now is made by several years of experience, but could be a master degree in university. The topic has a particular and details and is very deep, I mean, argument. Now we will go a bit faster, but if you have more questions than need, in the end of this, I mean, in the comment, in the website, you can find our contact, and of course we can help you to get deeper in the argument. Well, get into the structure of the program, how to set up a trip. Of course, when you have to organize a trip, you have to choose the right place to do, activities to do. Hopefully, you can find it in the platform, inclusionplatform.eu. But anyway, first of all, as we say, it's important to avoid to have several cities organize the trip starting from the, let's call it, highlights. So there is one workshop that we want to bring the traveler. There is some hotel who has a very good accessible path, tactile path. There is some colleague that organize some guided visit in that particular church, in that particular building, palace, or whatever. So, taking those highlights, around this we created the daily program. Because maybe, let's take Rome, that is huge, for example. If we are in Vatican, why? Because Vatican is important, but because, for example, there is Vatican Museum that are well done, accessible for blind. Once that we are there, we will go to find something to do close by that. I don't know, maybe the traditional market of Rome, I just say random information, is close to Arco di Travertino, the beautifulest, the most important whatever market. And close to Vatican there is one market that is not so important. Well, in our case, we will go to the not very important market. Why? Because we would like to avoid to cross Rome to go to the market, the most important to that. Why we do that? Not because we are bad person, to be polite, but there is a reason. Because somehow, for visually impaired, for example, being in a bus or being in the car crossing the city is not that enjoyable. Because of course, the person who can see in the car, you cross the city to go to the most important and famous traditional market, and meanwhile you can see the city, how beautiful is it, oh, that building famous, that monument, whatever. In case of visually impaired, all of that is not happening. So it's better to avoid those kind of long transportation. And there is also to say that for some aspect, maybe the most big, the most important, the most traditional, the most for everybody, is not the most interesting for our users. Because if we take an example of the most beautiful church of Venice, that is for sure San Marco Square, is the most pressure, the most important, the most let's say valuable, but is full of mosaic that are completely untouchable. There is the sky of the church, super decorated, full of beautifulness, but everything is completely visual, and the church doesn't made any tactile support. So maybe we will just have a very fast walk in that church, and we took longer time in another smaller church, though maybe nobody have heard about it, but we spend time over there because maybe there are more statues that are touchable, maybe because the church have a tactile path. So just to say that it's important when you organize a trip for visually impaired that your program take in consideration those aspects, and maybe you avoid the most traditional things to do. If you go to Colosseum and you don't have a prepared guide, or you didn't prepare yourself to show Colosseum for blind, it's unuseful to be there. What I want to say is that it's better maybe to be in Trastevere, because Trastevere can give you a real one of the face of Rome, instead to be in the most, let's say, famous place of Rome, and you don't have support, external support to show that monument. The only thing important to say about it is that, of course, if I choose in our program to avoid Colosseum, I have to explain to my traveler why. Because it's obviously that my traveler want to go to Colosseum. Why we should not go to the Colosseum? So basically, the reason is that blah, 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 blah. And we choose to let you discover a place that can, in our opinion, give you more sensation, more feelings of the place where are you visiting, living, or whatever. According to this, speaking about, let's say, cities, also the public transportation is a friend, let's say, of the travel organizer, because the public transportation gives a lot of input to the companion to help you to understand the place. When visually impaired is in the public transportation, but okay, first of all, can let's say start to do that game that I think all the traveler does. That is, how could be live in Rome? How could be for myself, for me, living in this city? Well, the public transportation is a moment when the visually impaired can face some service provide for the citizen. Because when we are tourists, often we live in a bubble beside the reality of the city. In general, especially the biggest touristical cities, have a different services for the tourist compared to the citizenship or who is living in the city. So the public transportation is a little taste for visually impaired to understand by themselves how could be for me living here. In plus, the public transportation can give to their companion many input of things to share. I don't know, in the bus is full of Indian people in this city, or is full of women. There is no women in this bus. Who knows? No, I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no, and so on. So that's why we support, let's say, the public transportation. We think you should not be afraid to make a question to your traveler. You have to, for sure, to get with a strong empathy with the travelers, but you should also understand better about their own life. Let's make some examples. We are walking in the street. Me personally, I like architecture. So when we are walking, I say, "Oh, these houses have a very a strong liberty style." In this neighborhood, there is a clear influence from Arabic because you can see the artistic decoration of the houses, the arch that is made in that way, and blah blah blah. My traveler beside me, I have to feel the interest. And in case I should be not afraid to ask to him, "Oh, but are you interested in what I say?" Because if you are interested, I can continue to speak about the architecture of the place and try to describe you the details of it. But if you are not interested, why I should continue? So I just stop and I don't get into too much details because you are not interested. Beside of this, the car aspect, no, I into car, me personally, I am. So I usually say to my traveler some detail of cars that I saw because it's something that for me, Lorenzo, takes my attention. So I transmit. But maybe my traveler completely don't care about the car and they look for more, I don't know, shops of cultural aspect. So I can tell them that the shop in this place looks more than a bazaar than a traditional shop, well ordinated with everything is in order, for example. In this sense, again, ask to your traveler, let's say that is not bad. If you know him, her before, you have an advantage. If you don't, anyway, try to get some information. We usually do with our traveler when we propose the program. If we have the possibility, we give them also some little choices. I mean, there is this museum, that museum, or that museum, or maybe these 5 activities, but they have a cost. So if I put all of them, the price will increase a lot. So you prefer to make this experience or that experience, this museum or that museum. So we prepare a better trip for you, and of course we already start to understand who you are. How much, if you choose to come to the Galleria dell'Accademia in Venice, where there is a beautiful tactile path with prepared guides, if you choose to this museum, it's meaning that I will make the my best to bring you in several churches, not only one or two that I'm planning, because in theory you like the ancient art, the traditional classic art. So I will do that. So the companion is the cultural mediator, as we said before, but is also, of course, the eyes of the person. The eyes in terms of what I see, how is made this building. The companion have to describe a lot. And how to describe, we will go into this with another webinar, because how to describe is a very huge argument and need a special aspect. Speaking about technicalities in describing, we get back once in this webinar in the concept of experiential tourism that you find in our platform. Again, because experiential tourism is a super good, let's say, friend of accessible tourism, especially in one sense. And for sure, experiential tourism is a friend of that pedagogic aspect who helps the traveler to understand a place. But be careful, because not every experience are welcome. Okay, so again, it's very important to know what our traveler likes or do not likes to do. Because, for example, can be that we are in Italy, we do a fantastic pizza workshop with a friend of mine that is great, but our traveler are not interested on pizza workshop. They never do a pizza. I will never do a pizza in my home. Why I have to lose my time in now making pizza workshop? I don't care, let's say. Or maybe we are in the city of the ceramic, so there is the workshop of the ceramic that made object, no, with ceramic, and after you bring back home your ceramic object. But maybe some people don't want to take part in this workshop. So it's important to choose the good experience to do according to according to our traveler. So to get direction of the conclusion, to do a trip or an excursion for visually impaired, you need for sure to have the good motivation, the good reason. We hope that thanks to this web project and this web page, the tourism also in sense of one day excursion, plus the activity that could be adrenalinic activities, not only cultural, can be a zip line for wheelchair users. But I have a group, again, as a youth worker with the wheelchair users, and I bring all of them with the zip line, so I make an adrenalinic activities. We think that could be a great starting for the youth worker, for this community, for the participant of this excursion. Back to the visually impaired, you need the organizer needs for sure a good activities to do, for sure a strong motivation, but take in consideration too that you maybe as a youth worker or a colleague of you have to enter in this role of the companion. Have to experience and after grow. If she like, maybe it's not my things. I prefer to not, because it's tough. It's not that easy. I mean, needs energy. But it is a role that is super important, basically, because again, give somehow the autonomy of the traveler. Of course, there are many visually impaired who likes to travel alone. But now we are speaking basically with a young group of youngsters, where supposedly there are some with visual impaired who would like to do the things alone, or the closest alone is possible. Alone from the parents, alone from home, whatever can meaning home. If you take in mind youngsters, teenager, when they go out with school, and they are a bit crazy, no? They like to be their self somehow, to exaggerate, because they are far from home. If we organize a trip, an excursion, again, with our youngsters and the blind, we say, yes, we can come, we can go to this park because there is the zip line organized for blind people with a good technician that explain you how to do the zip line and so on. But the person, the young, have to come with some accompaniment. And does it mean that these youngsters have to come with their mom, with their parents, with their whatever? So he will be not free from home background. That's it. That's why it's very important, the accompaniment. So what we have to do as a youth worker who want to involve some visual impaired in the group, we have to give them the chance to come with autonomy. Basically, my suggestion, speech, and willing for all of you, it's going to end. I hope that I do not, how to say, offended nobody, especially in the visual impaired world, that is a wild and huge world. I know that I had to make some generalization, but is because of the timing of the webinar and because of the give the first impression and tips to the listener. Anyway, we are here to get better and better. So if you have any comment, also bad comment, please do it in the session of the comment of this YouTube page. I really invite you anyway to visit the website, especially if you are a youth worker who want to start with work with people with different ability. And please contact us and my colleague in the web page if you need the support on it, if you need support to start in your community the work of, let's say, mixability group, because in every community there are some youngsters with disability who have so difficult to get involved in the young community. So let's say that all of those webinars and all our effort in this project is to give a more inclusive world, especially for the youngsters. I think that I say everything. Thank you very much for the attention, and see you at the webinar, how to describe visual things for visually impaired. Thank you very much.